folks. Welcome to our introduction video on preparing for this seminar. John and I are going to talk with you about a few points to get us off to a smooth start. Also speaking tonight is my colleague, Dr. Sandy Deemer, who's going to play the role of facilitator. So you just saw in the video what happens when online meetings don't go well. One of the things we want to do is talk to you about guidelines to make our successful Google Hangout. First thing we need to do is think about preparation. Please make sure that you've installed the plugin prior to our first meeting. You're going to want to secure a quiet location where you won't be interrupted, where you won't be disturbed. Make sure that you have earbuds to cut back on the frequency, and remember to adhere to our professional standards for conduct and behavior at all times. The last thing to make sure is that you submit your assignment to the Dropbox prior to our Google Hangout so that John and I have a chance to view it. Okay, back to John.
All right, on that last point, we just want to make clear that you're only submitting your lesson reflection to the Dropbox on the day that you're presenting. So in the first week, only those people that are presenting are submitting to the Dropbox. All right, the majority of this video is about the process of having a discussion in the seminar, and we're going to give you some guidelines and some tips on how to do that well. But before we do that, we want to talk about why it's so important to have a seminar format that you're responsible for leading more so than Lori and I. All right, so the first reason is it's just rewarding. You've been through 20, 18, I don't know how many years of education where you've been kind of the recipient, and now you're a teacher and you're taking responsibility in the classroom. But beyond that, now you're engaging with peers on a professional level where the give and take of discussing what's happening in your classroom can become a very rewarding experience. And so we want you to be able to do that well so you get the reward of having those good professional conversations.
The other thing that we want to think about is that we are members of a professional learning community. This is what teachers do. So we want to try to emulate the behaviors that teachers are doing and the responsibilities that come with being a member of a professional learning community.
All right, and then a very pragmatic reason is a major goal of this course is to help you be able to talk your way through an interview and look really good doing it. And so this course is oral based because we're trying to help you develop those skills, and we're going to be working on that throughout the seminar, developing great answers to questions, being able to see what kind of questions people ask and being able to go fluently with those questions. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual discussion format of your seminar. The first thing we want to point out is that for each week of the semester that you're online, we would like one of you to step up and take the role of the facilitator and rotate that between different people. Now, the facilitator is not really responsible to make sure people are asking good questions and so forth. What the facilitator's job is to keep people on time. That's the primary thing. And if people are getting off track with their questions, to bring them back. But everybody in the seminar is going to be responsible for asking good questions. All right, the actual format of the night. We're going to start each night off with a question that's going to be answered by the people who are not presenting that night. And it's going to have to do with knowing your students in an appreciative way, but going beyond the case study or the focus students. So the first night, for example, we're going to ask you what I think is maybe one of the easier questions is, thinking about some of your students who excel in your content area, what are some of the positive things you've been noticing about those students? All right, so the people who are not presenting that night are going to answer that question. And the purpose is to extend this mindset beyond the focus students to start to extend the mindset to other students in the class. All right, after that, the presenter there's going to be each person who's presenting is going to take a turn. They're going to have 10 to 12 minutes, I think, to do the whole presentation and questions. Is that right, Lori?
That's correct.
Okay. And what we want the presenter to tell everybody to set things up is, number one, what is the objective of the lesson? You might have 3 or 4 objectives, but we really only want you to tell us the one most important one. We want you to tell us what is the concrete thing you did. We don't want you to get into all your reasoning because that's going to be part of the discussion. What's the concrete strategy you did? And number 3, what kind of formative assessment did you do? Now, I We, again, don't want you to get into what's the data from the formative assessment, because that's going to come out in the discussion. So just the concretes, because we think that's what's going to set other people up to ask questions. All right, and then I'm kind of taking over your spot, aren't I, Laurie?
That's okay.
I'm just going to keep going.
Sure.
And then we're going to have the discussion start. And basically, you want to be asking, why did you do that strategy, and get the person who's presenting to get down to specifics, especially appreciative ideas about their case study students. And why do they think it was successful or not successful, or what's the evidence, and then why was it probably successful or not successful, and always trying to make connections between the evidence and the instructional decisions, right? Laurie, I did take some of your points there, so what would you want to add here?
Well, I think you've described it all pretty clearly. I think what we should probably do is now move to the next step. John and I are going to do a very brief demonstration on what one of the talking points in the presentation and the question might look like. So if you guys want to refer to example 1 that we distributed and looked out in class last week, this was our example of what a good lesson reflection looked like. John's going to share with you a quick example from there, and I'm going to follow up with some questions. Dr. Deemer's going to weigh in along the way too. So John, why don't you describe a little bit about what a presenter might say starting off in our Hangouts.
All right. All right, first of all, the objective for my lesson was that students would gain practice with math standards related to measurement, right? What I did was I had students go in groups to stations, and at each station there was a tiered activity. By tiered activity, I mean that it could be done on level 1, level 2, or level 3, depending on how far the student was able to take it and wanted to take it. Right. Most of the students went to level 3, but they didn't have to. They could have gotten to level 2 complexity. So some students took the content to a higher level than others based on their readiness for that activity. And after 10 or 15 minutes, groups rotated and they did a new tiered activity. The formative assessment was actually me looking at what students did to complete this activity while they were working. All right, so that's my presentation. So now the group would start asking me questions. Laurie's going to model that.
Okay. Well, John, I really liked hearing about your activity. It sounds like it went really well. It sounds like something that I might want to try in my class next week.
Let's think about Laurie's question. While it's complimentary, it doesn't really provide any feedback or questions for John about his differentiation technique. So, Laurie, why don't you try to ask John another question about his reflection that would require a deeper level of analysis.
Okay. John, I really enjoyed hearing about your strategy of using tiered activities. I'm wondering if you could tell me the rationale for the selection of this strategy. Why did you choose to implement this one? All
right. Well, you know, there's a number of things to this because it was groups and so forth, but the tiered part of it, the reason that I did that was because I have noticed in the way I normally present in math is I do a problem and we all do it together, and then students practice that problem and then we do it together again. But as I'm doing that, I'm usually presenting too fast for some students and too slow for others, and then when I give them time to practice, they either have too much time or too little time. And so I'm not really hitting the mark with most of the students in terms of their content ability. So I thought the tiered activity would allow that to be more, each student would get more what they need in terms of time, not get frustrated and not get bored.
Okay.
So Laurie, do you think that John provided the type of detail that you needed?
I think John did give me some detail. However, there are some specifics that I'm still wondering about. So John, you talk about the rationale due to the level ability of the students, but could you give me specific information about the case study students in your class and how they performed on this activity?
Mm-hmm. So when I think about my special education student, she is struggling with trying to keep up with the pace, and so in this with this particular strategy, she did do better, and I saw that she had a more positive reaction to the lesson. She didn't seem like she was checking out or getting stressed. Now, my English language learner is not really in the same boat. That hasn't been the pace hasn't been such an issue there. So that's where the group part of the activity came in, is because I wanted that student to engage in more dialogue with other students. And I did see during the group part that it wasn't just that they went to the station and worked problems kind of separately. They had to work on things. They had to help each other as they were doing, and I saw some dialogue. So I felt good about the reason for the ELL student, although it was a different reason than for the special education student.
Great, that's really helpful. So folks, one of the things, John and I would continue if we had more time, but that's the kind of detail that we're looking at. In particular, we're looking for specific evidence that he can talk about and teasing out details from those descriptions. We talk primarily about case study students because that's what we're really interested in directing your attention to. Another important piece, though, to think about is the use of formative assessment and how perhaps that's influencing our instructional decisions. John, what else would you want to add about this demonstration?
Just two things. We want you to remember to look at your students with an appreciative perspective. So the more positive things or the potential positive things you can talk about your students, that's going to be better than if you're talking about the negatives. And the second thing is, you might find it hard to do this kind of challenging questioning that Lori and I are presenting here, but remember that by doing this, you're helping each other get better at this. And the goal is not to be great on night one, but to be great by the end of the semester. So unless we push each other like we would on a sports team, trying to get better at our skills by challenging each other, we're not going to get there. So it might feel uncomfortable or weird to challenge each other, but we want you to do that because it's part of the process that we're aiming at to help you get better at this.
Okay, folks, one last thing before we wrap up here. Remember, the presentation and questions are going to take the bulk of our hangout. John and I are going to be popping in and out of your sessions because it's a professional learning community and you're at the point where you can work independently. We won't be sitting and listening, checking in on you necessarily. However, what we might do prior to jumping into another cohort is say, folks, let us provide you a little bit of feedback about what we're hearing. Let us encourage you to do a little bit more of this. Here's what we think you're doing a great job. Keep up the work. We'll be back in a little while. At that point, we'll jump into the other cohort. We'll come back. We'll always come back and say good night to you at the end of the seminar so you know that we've officially wrapped up. After we take care of doing the presentations and the questions on the reflections, the last part that we will ask you to do is just kind of check in with each other. 2 to 3 minutes. A lot of times this is where you may ask questions to other students about things that are happening in their classrooms or procedural things related to student teaching. We find that this is just a great opportunity to lend support to the folks that are in your cohort, another thing that we often do in our professional learning communities. At the completion of the Google Hangout, the last thing that will happen that evening is John and I will send you a link to a very, very brief survey, probably 2 or 3 questions that just give us some insight on what happened that evening in the seminar and let us know if there are specific issues in the seminar that we need to be paying attention to or responding to. John, do you have any other comments to add about our Hangout?
Just looking forward to the first night. Thanks, Lori. Thanks, Sandy, for helping us out.
Oh, you're welcome, and best wishes to all of you.
Thanks, folks. I'll look forward to seeing you on Monday. Bye, John.
Bye, everybody.